is so weird and amazing to be back on a stage with real people in the same room as all of you. Wow, this energy is really nothing like being on Zoom. This is wonderful. A lot has changed since 2019 when we launched the event for the first time. For one, I think we all really finally understand the scale of the plastics waste crisis. We know that 13 million tons of plastics are released into the ocean every single year. By now, you've probably heard that that's the equivalent of a garbage truck of plastic every minute. But luckily, by now we also know what the solution set looks like. We know that we need to target the design, disposal, production of plastics and packaging. We know that we need to invest in infrastructure and new business models and new technologies. We know that we need to establish policy and make sure it's harmonized across our systems. We know that we need to center climate and communities. We know what we need to do. But as we know, and the reason that we're here, is that the mechanics of systems change are still pretty elusive, and to get from ambitions and big goals to action and ultimately to achievement is very hard. So to figure out how to actually solve the plastics waste crisis, no pressure, I have an amazing panel. Would love to invite them out now. Please come join me on stage. With me, I have Keith Harrison, the CEO of the Recycling Partnership. Come on out, all of you at the same time. This is Kieran Smith, the CEO and founder of Mr. Green Africa, and in the middle is Taylor Madeline, the Director of Circularity Assessment Protocol at the Jambeck Research Group at the University of Georgia. Thank you so much for being with me and with us. Welcome. So Keith, I'm gonna start with you down there. We know the problem is very big, and we know that there are a lot of proposed solutions. What's the relationship between the two right now? Where are we? How bad is it?
So, hello, it's so nice to see humans. Anyone else feeling a little awkward? Me too, especially in this chair. So I'm trying to sit very naturally. So the Recycling Partnership was built for action. I've got about 25 years in this space from the public and the private sector, and it was clear that if we did not bring these sectors together to make some serious change, we were going to run out of time. And so the Recycling Partnership is a national 501c3. We work with corporate entities. We have more than 80 corporate partners, and communities, more than several thousand community partners, and we put them together for what change looks like. And a lot of times we get asked, all right, so what is the cost of change? What will it take to finally fix the recycling system? And that's what I want to dig into with you today. What it will actually take is making sure everyone can. 40 million American families can't. Everyone does. Suzanne just talked to us about some behavior change pieces, and that we have the infrastructure for innovation for the future, not just the past. The price tag, $17 billion. Don't freak out, because it's doable. We could stop having this conversation in 5 years if we just did that. And you want to know the return? $30 billion return in 10 years. That's a good investment, and I think we should make it. So I'd love to dig into that today, comfortably from my chair.
Thank you. And yes, and Kieran, when we talk about the plastics waste problem, we tend to focus upstream, what brands are doing, production. What role does the informal sector play in this global problem and solution?
First of all, thank you, everybody, for me to be here. And for the benefit of the audience, I'm here to represent all the hardworking entrepreneurs who are trying to solve the problem in the global south. So big pleasure to be here. And of course, in the global south, you have a huge informal market who's already been trying to extract value out of recyclable materials. And so as we talk about system change, as we talk about creating solutions to solve the plastic waste crisis, we have to make the informal market part of the solution. Especially, I think everybody in this room is very impatient on how fast we're accelerating to solve the problem. And if we want to continue with the acceleration of speed, we need to make the informal market part of it.
Absolutely. Another part of this system is academia. I think a lot of folks in this room might think that academics is sort of separate from practice and the solutions, and you've been working hard to understand how plastic gets into the oceans, where it comes from, what the life cycle looks like. What does that data actually enable? What are we doing with it?
That's a great question. So I'm the director of the Circularity Assessment Protocol. bear with me, in the Circularity Informatics Lab at the Genbeck Research Group at the University of Georgia. Throwing out all the circularities. So we've been collecting data with communities all over the world using what we call our circularity assessment protocol. And we essentially measure 7 different components of circularity. And we've done this in almost 30 different cities across 10 countries all over the world. And what we use are largely open source data tools, things like our citizen science debris tracker app, which if you haven't checked out yet, I never knew you could gamify collecting litter or documenting litter on the ground, but you can, and it's very easy and open and freely available. So we're putting data in the hands of people that actually have the power to make decisions in their own communities, in their own context with this information. And for some specific examples, recently we completed an expedition along the Ganges River in India and Bangladesh. And more recently actually used specifically the citizen science tool to look at leakage. So what plastic waste especially is escaping the waste management system and entering the environment along the Mississippi River and the Ohio River, which are also major petrochemical corridors. And really enabling informed decision-making in these different places, be it the tools to advocate for different types of policy, to drive behavior change, to push for proposals to get more infrastructure in a community. It's really putting that data where it's needed in the hands of the people that can use it.
That's great. And Keith, the Recycling Partnership has been focusing a lot on data accessibility. Tell us about that work and what you've done recently.
Sure. So we love data, and I love anyone who starts talking about it. Anyone else get tingly about that? That's good. And working in this space for a long time, what's clear is that this is an official term. Recycling is underdated. And so we really set out to improve the data accessibility around recycling, starting first with what is happening in all of our recycling programs in this country. I was just on a sidebar earlier, and I got to do a pop quiz there. So I'm going to give the same pop quiz to you. How many recycling programs are there in the U.S.? 9,000. You deserve a very sustainable prize. Good job. There are 9,000. Oh, was that Holly? Yeah. She just got elected to the board, so she passed the test. So there are 9,000 local recycling programs, and to date, it's really hard to know what's happening in each of them because they are all function independently. They all function independently, making their own decisions. Yesterday, I came from a recycling conference with a couple hundred New England recycling programs. These are towns like villages, like 1,000, 3,000 people. And I met with recycling coordinators who were really concerned. Their top concern: what do I do with animal carcasses in my bin? What do I do with exploding batteries? What do I do with paint? That is what's happening on the local ground, on the ground with our community partners. So we want as much data about what's holding them back, as well as we pair our data with where we want the system to go. Because unless we meet those local coordinators where they are, all of our dreams of a circular system will not come into play. We have to clearly identify the challenges on the local level, marry them to the aspirational system change goals, and then do the hard work to bridge that gap, to bring it together. And that's what data means for the partnership.
The local level is so different depending on where you're working. So Karen, you're working in East Africa. Context is way different. How does that shape the approach that you take in this work?
Yeah, so I think when you look at the Global South and you look at all the activities that are happening in the world to try to tackle the problem, we have the unique position in markets where there's little infrastructure, a huge informal sector. I always make the analogy that you can leapfrog. The same way we leapfrog on the telephone. We didn't have in Kenya or in other African markets or Global South, we didn't have to go and set the landlines for the telephone and to do this whole dialing. We were able to leapfrog into smartphones, or at least featured phones. So when I talk about circularity, I always make that analogy. We can do it right, in these markets where we have the opportunity to lay the land from get-go and make the informal markets part of the solution. I think that's the context we're really working in. So we have different challenges. In East Africa, we don't have to fight incineration plant to extract the resources back or divert the resources back, or with landfills, divert the resources out of it. We can go directly to the consumer, or we can go directly to the communities and make them part of the solution. And so that's really beautiful if we can leapfrog and change towards the circularity or circular systems that are local, that are inclusive, and making the informal market truly, truly part of the solution, where we also have a social impact. So when we talk about environmental impact, we at the same time we could create social impact and pretty much hit two birds with one stone. So that's what Mr. Green Africa has been working on, and trying to really set the systems and making sure that it is inclusive, it is fair, similar to all the sort of smallholder farmer value chains that you see out there with banana, tea, coffee, making working conditions fair, making pricing fair. I think all those elements, when you look at it from a supply chain perspective, that's the huge opportunity we have in East Africa, but also other markets of the Global South. And really, that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, and Taylor, I know that you do a lot of work to understand what that opportunity is. What sort of tools do you use, and what sort of things do you think about to assess that opportunity in different contexts?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple different ways we can do this. And I will say that there are things that we know about this issue, but there are still plenty of things that we don't know. And that shouldn't necessarily inhibit us from starting to implement solutions. We know what we need to do, and we can get started with that. That and collecting the data are not mutually exclusive. So one of the ways that we collect data in our research group through the Circularity Assessment Protocol is, like I said, there's sort of 7 components of circularity that we look at. And it's a tool to holistically look at the way that a material flows through a community, a city. And it's everything from input, so what is the packaging type, where is it coming from, how is it getting to where it's getting, what sort of product design is there, are there reuse schemes, what are the community perceptions or feelings around plastic or the access that they have to disposal mechanisms and otherwise. And then also, what does the collection look like, who, what, where, why, when, how, and what we call end of cycle, as opposed to end of life, the ideal term, as well as the leakage that I mentioned before in terms of what's escaping the system and why. So we basically characterize the system as a whole, and what this allows us to do is not only identify what's working, which is a really valuable thing for a city to know, but also how to prioritize and identify what some of those opportunities might be. And so one of the things that I think people in this room especially will appreciate is, especially when we look at leakage, it's getting down to what is this, where did it come from, how did it get here? And how do we stop it from getting here in the first place? And it takes all of those components to really understand that. And so that's one of the tools that we use to help prioritize and identify which interventions are going to have the biggest impact ultimately on the system as a whole.
So let's just say that each of these communities you're working in, they all have great projects where they are. And let's say that all companies are setting great goals. Keith, this is a system. We're looking globally. How do we make sure that each of these different projects, I think this is such the crux of the challenge, how do we make sure that they're all kind of working in harmony towards the outcome that we all know that they need?
Yeah, so will the sum of the parts equal the whole that we want? Probably not, unless we design it that way. And so the data that we've been amassing, we are starting to turn into better tools. So in the lobby, we have a table there where you can demo our plastic IQ tool, which helps any company that says, all right, we've made serious goals to reduce what we make, use recycled content, and make things recyclable. Now, what are the steps? Plastic IQ is that tool to do that. It's an open, free tool for anyone to use. And we think that that's really important, and we invite retailers to help us make that a consistent tool from one company to a next, because that will drive that will avoid the piecemeal problem that we just have. So I think that turning data into actionable tools is what's next and what you should be calling for. I think as you look for solutions, we need to be connecting the dots to make sure that the sum of the parts meets that goal of circularity. And again, if we move quickly, carefully with a plan, we could find a new topic to topic out in 5 years if you wanted.
But I love talking with you about plastic.
Well, we can still do it. We just could do it at dinner.
Great, today. So we're talking a lot about what brands and retailers and those up the value chain need to do differently, and there's a good reason that none of those people are on this panel. We wanted to uplift stakeholders that aren't typically on these panels all the time. But I think when we talk to brands, and many of you in the room are frustrated. The rules and terms of engagement are always changing. It feels like, okay, we were doing lightweighting and now we have to think about plastic waste, and what about climate? There's a lot to prioritize, and it's complex, and goals can be a lightning rod for criticism, and it's really hard. So recognizing those different tensions, I wonder if each of you can just very quickly give maybe one piece of advice to help wayfind and figure out what to do first. Kieran, I'll start with you.
Well, so in the context of where we work in, we've been able to, had the pleasure to work with Unilever on going through this journey of how to really engage from collection to recycling to bring it back into a packaging. And in the conversation, we were able to really draw out, there are many barriers and many execution barriers, but ultimately what it led to is, okay, A, can we collect the material, the resource, to bring it back into a high quality, recycling it into a high quality, and then bring it back into the packaging. And the route of how we were able to achieve, and maybe I have to mention as well, we were able to achieve in East Africa, we were able to launch the first packaging in a home care application made out of 100% recycled material, locally collected, locally recycled, locally made back into the packaging again. So full closed loop system. And what is the root cause that enabled us to do that within a short span of time? It's willingness from the leadership team, full commitment to really enable the various different teams, R&D, procurement, the local leaders of the country who manage the country, all of them having the confidence to make decisions quickly and work with companies like Mr. Green Africa or the other companies that are in the same space. And that commitment from the top, going all the way down, trickling it down, enabling them to make these decisions and make it happen, that's, I think, one of the root causes to really create that. And we were able to launch this in 2020, so already two years ago. And now what it led to is other brand owners jumping on the same bandwagon and saying, it's possible, we want the same thing. And I think, my main message here is really the top needs to give the local teams and different teams to make sure they collaborate with each other and give them the confidence to make decisions without misstep. Because usually, members, they don't want to put their head out and make the wrong decisions or work with the wrong partner, and that slows things down. And if we really want to be at the speed we want to be, that's something that is important to give this confidence and the sort of the ability to make decisions.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, give it up. Taylor, what advice do you give to Wayfind?
Following that, no, this might sound a little bit of a taboo, but honestly, eliminating packaging or identifying opportunities where you can eliminate waste in the first place, potentially moving towards services as opposed to products, will actually address a lot of those simultaneous issues. There are a lot of co-benefits to things like that. I would say look for the opportunities where you can simultaneously tackle all of those pieces: greenhouse gases, increase your jobs, increase even your revenue by potentially eliminating waste in the first place.
Yeah.
I agree. We cannot recycle our way out of this. Recycling will not deliver the circular economy, but we will never have a circular economy unless we fix recycling. So we really have to lean in on this. Thank you. We really have to lean in on building a better system. And I want to say that we can't just pivot out of plastics to solve this. More than half of all aluminum and steel cans from the households end up in the trash. 2/3 of all mixed paper ends up in the trash. 3 out of 5 cardboard boxes ends up in the trash. We have a serious system problem. And if the question is, what should people be doing to come together? One, use data to make decisions, Plastic IQ. And second, wrap your arms around the idea that we need policy to reach this $17 billion goal.
Absolutely. As an NGO, just following up on that, you talk about yourself as an accountability partner, but I wonder, as stakeholders not making all of the decisions, what leverage do you have, Keith?
We don't. We have influence. We have clear data. We have compassion. We have passion. I have lots of it. What we're trying to do is bring people together to say that we have common goals, and we can't just solve our goals if we only solve our own goals. We have to understand about the informal structure. We have to use data from our academic partners. We have to meet people where they are. Those recycling coordinators I'm from Walpole, New Hampshire. There are 3,000 people that live there, and they work their tail off to recycle. And when I told them that I was coming here to talk to you about this, their question was, can't they fix it? And I think that that's such an interesting thing of, can't someone else fix it? But first, we've got to reduce, reuse, and recycle. And that $17 billion price tag is doable. Access, education, and infrastructure will get us there. And it's not even out of range. What's $17 billion equal to? 0.5% of CPG sales over the 5 years it would take to fix it. So we have the plan, we have the data, we have the approach. I think we could find the cash. So I think we should work towards that.
Thank you. I have so many more questions I want to ask. We are quickly running out of time, so I just want to give each of you a chance. This is the plastics value chain in the room. There are so many other things represented, but that is the majority of the attendees here. What is your one call to action in just 10 seconds or so, each of you? What do you want to ask them before we close?
Well, I have so many, but we can, of course, interact individually with all of you. But I think the key part is if we want to leapfrog, if we want to include the informal market into the systems, we need to collaborate. We need to work with competitors. We need to work with like-minded organizations. And I think the collaboration is a key piece to make that happen quickly. And one example, for example, is we've been able to collaborate with Dow on some of the collection and really accelerating the topic around flexible packaging enabled us to very quickly bring resources together to ideate how can we create value out of this material that is perceived as being unvaluable. And collaboration was the key piece to make that happen. Global leadership being involved into making these decisions. So again, collaborations with partners, with competitors, with NGOs, with researchers, the whole shebang needs to come together and act quickly. So that's my...
Collaborate.
Yeah.
I have a feeling that we're going to have somewhat similar ones, but I would say similarly, I think that it's as cliche as it sounds, working together on change. I think look above you in your supply chain, look behind you, look at the full life cycle of your product or your service, and figure out ways that you can really maximize the efficiency of that chain and not innovate in a vacuum. I think that it's really important to remember that this is a solvable issue, but it's going to take innovation in all of those buckets and between those buckets. I think one really important example that I always think of is you can innovate a product that is 100% recyclable. It gets out in the market. Does that mean that there is a bin for someone to put it in? Does that person know to put it in that bin? Does the material recovery facility have a way of sorting that out? Is there an end market for that product? The accountability goes through the whole chain and the responsibility goes through the whole chain. And people can only operate in the system with which they're given. And I think that this is a system that's ripe for disruption. And I think it's time.
I agree. I hope you leave here with an allergy to step change and just the courage to be a bold advocate for system change. To say if you're tired of the way that things are, you need to look the truth in the eyes and go there.
Amazing. Collaborate, think in systems, and go there. Please join me in thanking my wonderful panel. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.